Welcome to the Hero Maker podcast. I'm Andrea Schreeman, writer-director EP, living in LA.
I'm Jennifer Morrison, and I currently serve as the Commissioner of Public Safety for the state of Vermont.
We are here to seek out and tell the full story of our friends who were murdered in college, Rachael Raver and Warren Fulton III.
We really need to make sure that their deaths were not in vain and that every possible lesson and improvement for the system can be squeezed from the retelling of the circumstances that ultimately led to the identification of their killer.
Here we are back at the Hero Maker podcast, and we just keep finding heroes, don't we?
Oh, we do. And this one was so delightful.
Yeah.
I don't think I knew what to expect going into this interview.
I really had no expectations also. Yeah. Well, I think we can tell our audience that we met with Rachael's brother, Matt Raver, and Matt has kind of been in the shadows, just kind of like listening and watching what we're doing. But he would send me an email every once in a while. And the last email he sent me, he was like, look, I can answer a lot of these questions. This one, this one, this one, this one. I know what happened here. I know what happened there. And so we invited him to be part of this. And we were super stoked that he said yes. And he did have that Raver vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. He did. And I really loved hearing his perspective. And I come to appreciate how diligent and aggressive even he was in pursuing his sister's case, like literally running a parallel investigation to the police, but constantly channeling stuff to the police and his files, his notes. I mean, it really was huge for me to understand how, in a way similar to Galen, in the way she responded in the aftermath of grief, this became almost an obsession for him. I think we could say that.
I think he would agree to that.
Yeah, I think he would agree to that. And he did fill in some blanks for us of information we didn't know. But the biggest part of the talk with Matt that really made me feel good was when he said that he was really enjoying the podcast and that we were doing a really good thing.
Yeah, that was very cool. So I do want to take a moment to go a little deeper on this idea that we have heard reverberate a few times, which is a family does not like to sit idly by. Mm. They have more questions than anyone. They are not hired to do the investigation, but they seem compelled to get in there and get answers. And they can be a lot of times a little more light on their feet because they don't have to fill out any paperwork or ask anybody for permission. They just go and do stuff. And yes, while we don't advocate for them to put themselves in harm's way, I would love to hear if there's anything innovative happening in the world of post-traumatic event investigations. How are police departments working potentially with families and at least dialoguing with them so that there's some kind of channel for that intense emotion and need after these big events? Do you have any idea if there's anything that answers that compelling need?
No, I mean, I don't think there's anything formal. I think that if we reflect on a little bit about what Matt said, he did believe he had access to the investigators and in fact developed a friendship with several of them over the course of many years that this went on. But he also said that he got called out, kind of sat down and said, okay, stop. You need to stop now because you could be polluting the case at this point. Remember, he mentioned in our interview that it might have been Murphy, but I can't remember who it was specifically, when an investigator said to him, you got to start channeling some of that energy somewhere else because you could actually harm the case by some of the stuff that you're doing. And so it sounds like the investigative team, whether that was in real time or the cold case team, really did allow him access to them. And it sounds from what he told us that he provided them with quite a bit of different
valuable information.
Yeah, valuable information, but that they weren't afraid to tell him, put on the brakes, guy, slow your roll. So I think the system worked as well as it can in this case from what Matt has shared and what the investigators we've talked to have shared. But there is no two cases alike. So there's no perfect way to navigate that, what the family does and how to manage that. No two families respond the same. I think we can say we've learned that during this journey so far. So there is really no way to say, okay, here's what you do when you're dealing with grieving family members who strike out on their own to conduct their own investigation. but you get used to it as an investigator. It's not uncommon at all. And other families, literally, as we know in this case, even they turn a corner and move on, and they don't spend a whole lot of time looking backwards and digging up answers. So even within this case, we've seen multiple different ways of handling it. And if you just look at the way Matt and Dee Dee responded, and you contrast that with Warren's family's response to the incident.
Or even the Jeffersons. I mean, the Jeffersons stayed connected. They wanted updates, but they weren't as actively involved in hunting answers.
Right. So everybody's going to respond differently. Matt is a super detail-oriented, linear type thinker, a Marine, now a pilot.
No, but who got very impassioned and angry. And also there was a lot of emotion driving him and commitment to answers. But he was able to communicate it in a way that gave him what seemed like pretty good access.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I think that I completely understand why he would be angry and impassioned. That was his little sister, and they were very, very close.
Very close.
He called her his shadow, but they went everywhere together. They both wore the same soccer jersey, number 10. And as a Marine, of course, a young Marine in training, I believe he was in flight training at the time, that, he's a protector. He's a defender, and he couldn't defend his sister. So a lot of that got channeled into darker spaces. And he worked through it, obviously, in his journey and in his maturity. He worked through it. And the Matt Raver that we spoke to was delightful, charming, smart, sensitive, and very clear in the details he brought to the table.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Matt, for sitting down with us and sharing your insights and sharing your process. It was a really, really beautiful conversation. And there's also some kind of magical details in there too, potential. I'll just say the butterfly story. That was really compelling. And I think our audience is really going to appreciate this interview.
Well, I know I certainly did. I never knew that Matt would want to come talk to us. So just the fact that he was willing to follow along on the podcast and then come talk to us was super meaningful to me.
Yeah, it was cool that there was somebody out there who actually responded to media@theheromakerpodcast.com and got in touch and said, yeah, I'd like to talk. That was great.
Love it.
Here we go. This is our new friend, Matt Raver.
I guess we should actually introduce myself. I'm Jen Morrison. I was on the soccer team with Rachael, and I was the captain of the team the year that her death happened. And that was a tremendously confusing time for all of us, as I'm sure you know. And I vaguely recall knowing that you existed, but I do recall your mom quite well. And of course, I've had the opportunity to meet Dee Dee since then. But in real time, I have pretty strong memories of your mom. I remember taking a terrible van ride up to your hometown with wrestlers and female soccer players all piled into a GW athletics van to drive up and back to attend the funeral and spend a few minutes with your family and then turn around and drive right back. And yeah, I've been through your hometown, and I realized I was there one time when we were taking my kids out to look at colleges up off Highway 11 or Route 11. And I all of a sudden said to my husband, I was like, wait, I've been here before. It was like this tremendous deja vu. And I figured it out within like 5 miles. I was like, that's the funeral home. This is Rachel's hometown. And that was not that many years ago, less than 10. So sticky memories for sure.
Matt, there's one thing that we have not done yet. I'm embarrassed to say 20 plus episodes in, and I wonder if you could be the voice of this for us. Can you talk to us about who Rachael was?
Sure. I mean, she was she's just a good kid. She was a, straight A student in high school. She was the kid that I remember someone was being picked on or had a drug problem. Rachael would sit there and eat lunch with them. And she was this vibrant, intelligent. Our secret gift we were going to give to our parents that Christmas was that you're going to have a son who's a pilot and a daughter who's going to go to law school. And I was going to help her pay for law school. So that's your gift. You don't have to pay for it. You're going to have your daughter through law school and your son a pilot. It was just a happy time. And we're really looking forward to things. We shared number 10. That was our jersey number. I used to walk in a place back in Yorktown. They say, "Where's your shadow?" because it was Rachel. Rachel went. We went to the same bars. We hung out at the same places, and I miss her dearly.
I bet you do. Were you 1 year younger?
Older.
Older. Got it.
Yeah, she was the youngest, right?
Yep, she was the youngest. She was the youngest. Yeah.
4 kids.
4 kids. Yep. 2 older sisters, and then the one boy, and
No pressure.
no, I got it. She was always a good one. I was, always, a little bit of the crazy one, and or a little bit, an average kid, just filling my oats. But yeah, she was something else. I miss her dearly.
I'm sure you do. Did you ever have an opportunity to meet Warren?
Yeah, I did. I thought he was a really nice guy. He was very nice, and they just seemed like I was going through some of the newspaper articles and stuff, and I described them as 2 very almost naive, just healthy, athletic kids. And I could say that now because they were 22. And yeah, he was a very nice boy.
Yeah,
I liked him.
But naive in the sense that they trusted everyone and everything. They trusted life like that.
Yeah, I could see them. If someone walked up to them and say, "Hey, can you give me a ride?" Or there was a naivety in them. I started to lose in the Marine Corps, but they didn't.
Around the same age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were like I was in college. They still were in the college mode. And
while she was down in D.C., so you were in the Marine Corps and going to school. Where were you at that time?
I was down in Pensacola, Florida. Matter of fact, that weekend, Rachel was going to come visit me, and I told her no. It's to this day. I had stuff going on, so I said, let's make it another weekend. But yeah, I was down in Pensacola, Florida at flight school. And when I got the news that no one was hearing from her, and I remember Sunday afternoon, it was like 5:00, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was my sister. And she said, "Matt?" And I said, Rachel? I said, no, we still haven't found her. And then I knew right there. I don't know, it just hit me, and I called my friend over. I just lost it. And I just knew, 5:00 by Sunday when there was no word that. So I went in Monday morning and then flew right up on Tuesday.
Yes. So there've been, you sent me an email a few months ago, acknowledging us for the work we're doing, and I'm listening. I'm here listening to what you're doing. But then you sent me another email really recently.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, look, I've got information. I can fill in a lot of these gaps for you.
Yeah.
What's on your mind to share with us? Things that you've heard pass by in our conversations that you feel like you have something to contribute to. Really curious.
If you go through the case, like, you probably know everything about Veronica. She was murdered 10 May, Rachel's birthday. She's at a supermarket getting a salad, 9 p.m. at night, and she was visiting her boyfriend. I believe he was a doctor or a med student at Johns Hopkins. That's where she was coming from. CIA accounting, etc.
This is Tina Jefferson, also known as Veronica.
Right. So yeah, I mix up the names sometimes. I call them first.
No. You called her the right name. It's just that our audience knows her as Tina.
The sheriff thing. He followed them for a good 5 minutes. They jumped a curb. He kept following them. And then she got out of the car on the passenger side and was leaning in and looked back at the sheriff a couple times. And then that's when he drove off. And they know when she was killed because he must have let her know he was going to kill her behind that school because she screamed. Someone heard the screaming and then the shot. And I say that in the context of Prieto, how cold and cunning he was. He never really got caught. He got caught because the other guys screwed up on a triple murder and rape. Every one of his victims were killed. And had it not been for his 2 buddies screwing up, he probably would still be out there today because they wouldn't have had the DNA. Maybe eventually it would have been in the system. He probably would have, after the killing. We had his DNA, but we just didn't have a face to it because California hadn't loaded it and he hadn't been arrested on death row or not. But I saw a recurring theme there. And the first one was with the sheriff. I was told that he quit the sheriff's department because he was getting threatening phone calls. And it was really freaking the guy out.
This is the guy who witnessed Tina Jefferson get out of her car. That guy was receiving threatening phone calls, and then of his own volition quit the sheriff's department.
Yeah, I was told it was over this case, over Rachel's case. The guy was unarmed. He was coming off duty. There's not except get the plate and call it in, which maybe he should have done. Hindsight is 20/20. That's why I hate bringing up some of the other things too, is because there's one person to blame for this, and that's him. And so when a police officer makes a mistake, or I made a mistake, or didn't pick up on what was going on is because you'd expect it's just a normal occurrence to a boyfriend and a girlfriend in a fight, not a serial killer abducting someone, having them stand outside the car and having a gun pointed at them.
Yeah, and we were pre-cell phone era.
Yeah, exactly.
And so to pull away and go find a payphone to call it in, now you've lost your eyes on whatever you're trying to look at. So there's a lot of reasons why that probably didn't pan out to be an intervention. But I am really curious about who would have harangued him in retrospect. So that's a curious thing to ponder.
Every single person or case that I saw, and I don't know about the West. I heard things about what happened out West to some of the families, but when I listened to the podcast, she didn't state it. But there were some really weird phone calls going on to Rachael, Jerry Murphy, myself, my mother. And I'm 100% sure if it wasn't Prieto, it was one of Prieto's closest friends or associates. Someone tied into this, maybe his gang member that called me that I spoke to and that my mother spoke to. Hands down.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I told Andrea a couple days after the murder, I received a phone call at home. Everyone was around. The neighbors were over. And it was a Spanish accent, heavy Spanish accent. And he said, I'm Muerto de Los Angeles. And he kept saying that. He said, I'm trying to call Norman, my dad. I tried to call him at work. And then he kept talking. And then he said something like, Norman. I said, no, I'm the son. I'm Rachel's brother. And he got all excited. And then he kept repeating, I'm Muerto de Los Angeles, but I'm not New York. I'm not in New York. And this conversation went on for a while. And then my mother started screaming, let me talk to him. And I told him, I said, no, it's just a friend of dad's at work. I was half like in shock. I didn't know. And then I just felt that this was either somebody, sick individual trying to taunt us, or this was him. And then I said something to the effect of, I will find you, or something like that. We will find you. And then he hung up. The same phone call occurred to my mother twice. Muerto de Los Angeles. I'm not in New York. And now this would be a good example. I talked to one or two of my cop friends. They said, well, if he calls back, immediately call the police. I should have called them right there. And then my mother didn't want to alarm me, so she didn't tell me about the follow-on phone calls. So it wasn't until a couple of years later that my mother and I were talking, and I wrote a whole thing on this. When the cold case squad started taking over in Fairfax, I sent that to them. It was buried in the file, Bob
Murphy.
But after they found him, I hung up the phone, and then I'm like, and it finally hit me while it was burning in me so much. And I called Bob up. Bob, I go, okay, he's Spanish. He's from Los Angeles. He's the murderer. But now I know why this is burning me. He said, I'm not in New York. I go, who said he was? The murder took place in Virginia. The car had not been found yet. I understand with my mother, the car had been found, but he thought the car had been found. I have the tickets right here. The first ticket was on the 4th for illegally parking. So, he shot straight up there. It started getting ticketed. I don't know when he burnt it out. If it was at night, I was going to get the fire report. The guy who wrote the ticket, by coincidence, I was talking to my son's soccer coach. I'm like, yeah, I got to go down to Virginia. This is for the trial and everything. And I told him what happened. And he said, the murder case from Virginia in the 103rd? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I'm the one who wrote the ticket.
Oh, small world.
So he had his book. He went into it took him like a day. He finally found his police roster, or whatever you call it, his record book, and him and Bob Murphy were in contact about the first ticket.
You just gave me chills.
That is
a weird coincidence.
Yeah, there were a couple like that. I know Rachael prior to it was getting phone calls with someone with a strong accent.
Yes, I remember hearing about this, but tell us about these phone calls that Rachael got.
It was from a guy with a heavy accent, and he was saying things like, I know you're leaving for class now. This would be early in the morning. I know when you come back from class. And words to that effect. And I only found out about it because at one point she was dating a friend of mine who was a Marine. And he said, I don't want it. Rachel, I'm not supposed to tell you, but. And then I rose up there and I said, what is going on? She said, oh, no, it was just probably someone doing a prank. I think it was probably, what's his name? Josh Abelman, her first boyfriend. I said, I said a heavy accent. So I called Josh. He's like, no, he goes, I heard about it. I'm pissed. And I always wondered there was construction going on above her house in a building just to the right of hers. They were doing roofing and stuff. I don't know. Could have been just any nut, but the accent is what stood out to me. And Jerry Murphy said prior to it that week he was getting hang-ups where someone was on the and they'd hang up the phone, getting weird phone calls too.
So wait, who's Jerry Murphy? I know Bob Murphy, but who's Jerry?
He's from Yorktown. He was one of Rachel's close friends' brother, who Rachel rented the house from, shared the apartment.
In DC.
Alexandria.
Alexandria. Okay, so she was being stalked in some way or threatened.
An old boyfriend.
Yeah. And it may or may not have...
May putting on an accent.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't either. But it was the phone. I keep going back to that because no doubt about it. What are the coincidences of a Spanish guy saying he's from Los Angeles? He's a murderer from Los Angeles.
Not New York.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for Norman. Oh, but you told me part of the reason you think that they got the contact information was because Rachel had a checkbook in the car. And then when he took the car, he now had access to her documents.
He had everything. And he pilfered a purse. And in that purse would have been the checkbook. And the checkbook would say Norman Raver, IBM, and gave the work number of IBM, the credit union.
Okay.
So it flowed. The checkbook was missing. We never accounted for it. I came really close. I almost did this. I was at a couple cop friends. I kind of regret not doing this if you tried to cash any of those checks because the account was closed. And there was a warehouse. There's probably like 10,000 checks. And we were just going to go box to box for like a week, a bunch of us, and see if we could find him. That was the lengths I was going to try and find this guy.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard a very different but parallel path that Galen engaged in when her daughter was murdered on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And you went at it more tactically, like a Marine would go at it, like an airline pilot would go at it. Hers was straight emotion, retribution driven. We heard about her going up into a field where she thought bad deeds had been done and she laid in wait, hoping they would come back, going out and knocking on doors where she saw a truck. There's no right way to get yourself through something like this. And trying to find answers is sort of the common denominator in all of these. You went about it in a very tactical, organized way. Other people follow their heart or instinct. And so I don't think you should for 1 minute think that anything you did in the wake of your sister's murder was the wrong thing or you could have done more.
It just, there were opportunities here. It haunts me that the neighbors saw them being walked across the street from the car. I don't know if you know that one.
No.
A neighbor pulled up and he described it as two individuals being herded by a third person across the street.
From the apartment or from Mr. Day's?
No, in Ruston.
In Reston.
In the neighborhood.
Okay.
Driving down the road, he came around the corner and he described it as, you didn't get a good look at them, but two people being directed by a third person to cross the street.
Across the street, which would have been pointing toward the woods, I'm guessing.
Yes.
And do we know what time that was?
Yeah, I have a pretty good timeline because they heard the gunshots. They also have a police report from the cop car on patrol came and stopped at the car and saw that the passenger door ajar and the dome light was on. Looked around, didn't see anything, and then kept going.
But they didn't make a log note or punch an incident for that. They just kept going and recalled it in hindsight.
Yeah, I know it came out later. I became close with the first detective, Mallet.
Jim, right?
Yeah.
And you said he passed away last year.
Yeah, or the year before. Yeah, sure did.
Yeah, he was the first detective on the case.
Yeah, and he used to come up to New York. He would go into the gut. I remember one night some guy tried to wail on him, punch him, and Mallet ducked, and his hand went through the window, the bad guy. The other cops grabbed him and threw him on the floor. Said, just get out of here, and they ran out of the ball.
That was up in New York?
No, I was in Queens. He was roaming around Queens in the gut trying to get information. And
how would you describe him?
I would say he was like 155, 160, smoked heavy. Good looking guy, though. Used to surf. He was a surfer down in, I surfed too. He's down in Georgia. He was an instructor down there. But he would be like, if you portrayed someone in a movie, I hate to say it, it would be like the cop with the cigarette in his mouth and the shirt unbuttoned, 3 down, dressed to a T kind of thing.
But a wiry guy, 155, 160?
Yeah, I'd say he's about that, yeah.
It's not a lot of surfers have too much body fat, yeah.
He was a good guy. I mean, he was reactive too. When I found stuff on Rachel's grave, it was New Year's, and I just had this feeling. I went to the grave that night. I was in a bar with my friends. I said, I'm going to go.
This is like a couple weeks after she died, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, that year.
So then someone came and smoked cigarettes over the grave. Winston's, the old, no filter, hardcore things. And they had like 4 or 5 cigarettes. It had to have been like 1 or 2 in the morning. I worked it out because there was like a hailstorm or something, and it was on top of the snow and the hail. And then they left a pack of matches there. And the pack of matches were a place called La Cage des Aux Follies. It was like a transvestite bar in the worst section of DC you could possibly be. And so I called up Mallett about it.
But she's buried in New York.
Right.
But it's a matchbook from Washington, D.C.
The gut of DC, that's correct.
Keep going.
So then I put on gloves, I put everything in the plastic bag, and I sent it down to Mallett. I said, there are other stuff left down. Again, Mallett, Jim, I go, but this bothers me. First of all, she doesn't know anyone that smokes, but someone to sit there 4 or 5 cigarettes and then put something down from a gay bar. It wasn't even a gay bar. It was like a real hardcore sexual bar, because I looked it up, in the gut of DC. And Mallett went there. They hung out there. They checked it out. They asked around. They never found anything from it. But someone left a nickel with George Washington. To me, that's someone, a college student, came by and they put it. But that's smoking the cigarettes over the grave.
That's so upsetting. That's so disturbing.
Yeah. So that's where I was like, okay, this guy is still around. And that's when I started going down to Jamaica, Queens with the posters and putting them up. And then when they found the car shortly thereafter, that's when I was putting posters. I know you're in the neighborhood. I'm coming for you. I will find you. And I'm just walking around the streets, putting them up on telephone poles. And I put them all over. I had a friend that he worked for a printing company. He was just printing them out for me. And I was going around. And eventually that's when I walked into that Spanish place.
You got to tell Jen the whole story.
So let me show you a picture.
So he's putting up these posters. I'm coming to get you.
Yes. And I'm looking for this guy. Can you see this picture?
Yeah.
Turned out the people that made this was from the Arlington case. This was one of the composites that someone made, and the profile was, they were looking for a black guy. So I'm looking for a black guy. I have a poster with the car and everything else. So I walk into this Spanish place, and there's 1 or 2 guys behind the counter, and then there's like 3 or 4 guys in one booth, and then to the right of them is one guy sitting alone at a booth going through a bunch of papers and stuff. So I walk over to the counter, and I start telling them I'm looking for this guy. I'm going to all the stores. Anyone you know from Virginia, blah, blah, blah. And I keep looking over the table. And every time I look at them, they put their heads down. And I'm like, ah. And I look at the guy that was alone, and he just gave me like a cold look, but then just put his head down and started going back through the papers. I just had a real bad feeling.
Your spidey senses went off. Yeah.
And when you're talking about a wanted poster, people say, oh, let me see that or something like that. No, they've got quiet. And none of them said a word. They were talking when I walked in. And then when I said that, boom, you could hear a pin drop. And none of them would eye contact me. And I'm like, ah. So I went up the road and started putting up more posters. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes later, I heard a car coming behind me. And it's slowly coming by me. And I'm looking at the reflections across the street on my right. And the window's down on their side. And they come by me slowly. And then they slow down again. And then the one guy in the back, as clear as day, I still remember he said, he goes, that's him, that's him, that's him. And he was like bouncing up and down in the back seat. He goes, that's him, that's him. And there were cars coming behind them, and they took off. So I kept going up the street. It had a bad muffler, so I heard the muffler coming again. I'm like, oh, man. Now, this time it slowed down to like 3 miles an hour, 2 miles an hour, and I'm going up a slight incline, and it's coming behind me, and I can see that the window again is open on the passenger side. And I'm thinking, they're going to rob me. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking they see a lone white guy in Jamaica, Queens. I'm going to get robbed by a gang. And then slowly, it was like the movies. The car was behind me. I'm pretending like I don't see it, but I can see it in the reflections. And then there was a little alleyway up ahead on my right. I'm like, okay, I got to dodge down that. I'm thinking, and just at that moment where the car starts pulling right up next to me, like the grace of God to this day, a delivery truck pulls in between the two of us and stops and blocks their view. And I ducked down and booked right down the alleyway and ran like hell. We talked about it later, me and Bob, and I'll never know. But 4 Spanish guys, that's him. And Prieto was in the neighborhood at the time I was doing that.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm glad they didn't find you.
I mean, it might not have been him. It might have just been another Spanish gang. But
yeah, there's something too about that kind of excited, jacked up energy that you've referenced twice now, like on the phone with the guy and then this guy in the back seat. And that there's something about that maybe you're drawing a parallel.
Yes. I noticed that on both. He went nuts. It was like a jumping bean, those little toys we used to have as a kid. He was bouncing literally up and down in the seat. That's him. That's him. Like he was losing it, the guy. And I'm like, what do you mean that's him?
No. Yeah.
Because I thought about that later. They're just going to rob me. There's a guy we can rob. That's him.
Yeah. When you actually saw Prieto later, did you think you had ever seen him before? Like, did you have a moment? And no. He looked familiar to the guy in the Spanish place, but I didn't get a good look at him.
So I don't want to waste too much time on this, but
No.
you were telling us about the neighbors who witnessed what we think is Rachael and Warren being marched across the street. Did you have a time? Do you remember if that was like earlier in the evening or already on to Sunday?
No, it was, I have the exact time, to be honest, in my papers. I can text it to you, but it would work out perfectly, the drive from when they left Mr. Day's. I believe it was about a 40-minute drive, but the time would work out perfectly.
That it just was like right from the bar to there.
Right, yeah. And they know that because they also picked up a picture on the toll roads.
God, it blows my mind how much evidence doesn't get to court. It just blows my mind.
You know, they did a brilliant case, and, you know, they wanted to really focus in on things that I wouldn't have thought was important. Like, was Rachel's car full of stuff? I'm like, yeah. I used to kid around. That was their second office. I mean, it was up to here, Bob, and blah, blah, blah. And what they did was they built a case that there could only be one criminal, one assailant. Building that case up, there was only one person. And things like that came out.
Let's focus on the shortest distance between 2 points, getting this guy convicted. Yeah.
Yeah, without opening up a can of worms and
anything that could distract people. Yeah. You said that also the neighbors heard somebody reported gunshots.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So you really have 3 separate references, really 4, because you have the toll booth. But then you have the police officer, you have the neighbor, and then they heard the gunshot.
Okay. I don't want to distract us. Keep going. You just got great stuff.
Okay. His first murder, I just found this not interesting, but right along Prieto. One of the murders he did was one of his Hispanic friends that was a newspaper reporter or something like that.
This was Manuel Cerminho.
Yes. So dealing with the girlfriend of Prieto, the father was over, and Prieto had killed a young black man prior to that in DC. And according to the girlfriend, Prieto kept the gun in his mattress in the apartment. She was able to describe it. It matched, 357 and everything. But he told his father what happened. And the father said, that guy was with you or whatever. And he goes, yeah. So he saw, he's like, yeah. He goes, well, you got to take care of him. And then a week or 2 later, the guy was in that time frame was killed.
Do you know why? Did it ever come out why that you're saying black guy was killed?
No, I don't. I heard 2 different things. I heard it was just like a quick robbery and just shot him and threw him in a dumpster or something like that. I didn't get much details, but ballistically it matched the pistol.
It definitely feels like an escalation, right?
Yeah.
He kills a guy. He gets whatever he gets. He has a motive for it. It suggested it's maybe robbery. And then the dad says, well, you have to take care of this other guy.
Right.
And then now you're just killing people to cover your tracks. And so now that becomes part of what you do. And so now one incident is never just an incident. It's like, okay, who's around? Who's looking? Like, that is a massive, and coming from his father. It's just like, ugh.
I think he was in the bar in Mr. Day's that night. I do. Because a couple of witnesses described that there was somebody, a small, dark individual in the corner of the bar, not talking to anyone. That looked suspicious. That's going way back. That was never verified. But there was talk about that he was hanging out in the bar, eyeing people.
And this is way before security cameras or anything where you could prove that.
Exactly. I wrote down some of the things. He escaped from prison at one point, Prieto, after the drive-by.
Yeah, he was in a minimum security juvenile prison.
Yeah, he was involved in a prison stabbing where the guy was killed, but it went off camera, so they couldn't bring him on it. But they're almost positive it was him. It was a bunch of guys, like a gang-related stabbing. I believe the guy died. I'm not sure on that one, though. And then they caught him plotting. There was a young prison guard in California, and he would occasionally let Prieto take a shower without his ankle cuffs or whatever. So they found a calendar, and Prieto was plotting when that guy would work. And he was going to try and attack him and figure out a prison escape attempt. But he was definitely plotting against that sheriff in prison.
If you or someone you know is connected either personally or as the result of violent crime to Alfredo Prieto, a convicted rapist and killer who lived in and around San Bernardino, California, Arlington, Virginia, and Jamaica, Queens, New York between the years of 1984 and 1990, We'd like to hear from you. Please email us at info@theheromakerpodcast.com.
He definitely knew me during the trial, I'll tell you. I used to sit right behind him. I used to say pretty strong things to him, just loud enough so I'd see him turn his head every now and again, especially when Greenspun and Shapiro would start talking. I'd say, I'm still here. You didn't get me in Queens, but I'm going to watch you die. I was saying stuff like that. I know that's cruel, and that's, I snuck in one time. He had this stupid tie he used to wear. And so I snuck in and I made it into a noose. I snuck into the thing and I put it on his table. So I'll never forget. He came in and he goes to put his tie on and he holds it up and it's in a noose. And he turns to Shapiro and shows it to him and Shapiro spun around and just boom, right at me, eye to eye. And I just looked him right at him and smirked.
Yeah.
They were, I think, I wanted a robust defense, but their tactics, I should have pursued it. I initially did file a complaint with the Bar Association in Virginia. They were trying to throw the trial. So I don't know if you heard about the expert witness.
I didn't.
Okay, so the end of the trial, we've been through 3 trials. This is the death penalty. The last witness is their expert witness on traumatic PTSD of Prieto. He doesn't show up. Second day doesn't show up. They say, well, his wife is very sick in Texas. The judge finally gets him in and orders him in. And he says, Judge, and he's crying. My wife is dying of cancer. I have to go back in Texas and be by her deathbed. And, everyone's like, okay. Now, the jury is sequestered at this point. So they've been sequestered for like a week out of court. And that's what they want. They know it's guilty, but they want not guilty. And that would horrify me because then he goes back to California if it's life. He was yelling at one point, Prieto was yelling at Shapiro, get me back to California. He wanted to go back to California really bad. So they find out that this guy's wife is not dying. And Shapiro admitted in front of the judge that he knew that. The guy was going over to Connecticut. I don't know if you remember, there was a doctor and his wife and 2 daughters. And these 2 scumbags went in there and murdered the family and burnt the house on fire. And the daughters were tied down to a bed. And then they ran out and the doctor survived. And they got these 2 guys and they were serial killers and they were collecting people's sneakers, just driving around killing people. He was at their trial. He was double dipping in 2 trials. And he admitted it in front of the judge. Shapiro admitted that he knew. And the judge had a decision. And he said, okay, I'm not going to sanction you. Put him on.
Or drop him from the witness list.
Yeah, but then you open up an appeal on a death penalty case. Now you have it ironclad. They broke every rule possible, but we're still going to let you go ahead because we were feeling pretty good about the case too at that point. They knew he was in Connecticut testifying in another case, and they were going to throw that case after 3 trials. The conduct, holding up Rachel's panties, throwing her jacket on the floor and trying to desensitize the jury. I found repulsive, but it's not out of the box for a defense attorney trying to do everything he can. But when they went that far as to throw the trial and break their fiduciary duty as an attorney, that was very, very upsetting,
Yeah.
And we went through a lot. My mother was dying of ovarian cancer, holding her stomach, and gave her witness
impact statement or victim impact statement.
There's Prieto winking at her with his left eye so the jury can't see on the right side. That's the type of person he was.
He was winking at your mother?
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how this impacted your mom and your dad?
Well, my dad, he was brilliant. You just Google his name, you're going to see patents. And age 16, full engineering scholarship. He was on the first computer. He was on a team that built the first AWAC airborne radar, first microchip, IBM. He was a guest of honor and everything at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. Just a brilliant man. But this was it. He just drank heavy, sometimes a bottle, sometimes 2 bottles of vodka a day. And he just slipped very quickly into dementia. I didn't have him as a dad after a year or 2. My mother, she's tough, and she made it her mission. She wanted to see this through. I think her biggest upset was that she couldn't make it to the execution. She knew she was going to die.
And she did die right before the execution, right?
Yeah, just before the execution.
What was that like for you, being able to be there?
That was a huge relief. I wanted it done. It was something I felt obligated to do. When Rachel died, it was, you can imagine, very dark. And I remember one night in particular, everything's screaming, you're in such pain, and, a bottle and a shotgun and a pack of cigarettes don't mix when you're that upset.
Mm-hmm.
And grief. Yeah.
That was a dark night. And then I woke up the next day and it was just sunshine. It was weird. The birds were chirping. And I drove to her grave and I just fell down and I said, no matter what, at this point, I'm never going to give up. Justice will come. I'll live my life. I won't let it dictate me, but every free moment, every effort I can, I'm not stopping until we find him. And a certain strength came that day about, myself and time to get back to flight school and get on with my life. And that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
But it will always be with me because I'll always miss her. But the death penalty to me was a chapter that had to be closed. I could not live with myself knowing he was in prison. He was trying to get drugs in. He was writing appeals. And he actually went to the Supreme Court, an appeal that he wrote. Here's a guy claiming he's retarded.
Yeah.
A handwritten appeal that went all the way to the Supreme Court about isolation for people on death row. I couldn't deal with that. So when they brought him in that room, first they searched me up and down, I said to my friends, I said, I'm going to eat popcorn and watch him die. So I'd stuff popcorn in my pockets, which of course the guards found. And they're like, sir, you have popcorn here. I go, oh, I was at a picnic. And they're like, oh, okay, sir, like take your jacket off. Like, sir, you have popcorn in this pocket. And then they start patting me down. They're like, you have popcorn in all your pockets, sir. Can you please explain why you have popcorn?
Yes.
I go, I started just BS. I'm like, oh, I'm at this picnic, and then my one friend, I had the popcorn. I'm like, oh, give me some of that. I'm eating all the popcorn. And then it was like this big, older black guy. His arms are folded. He's just staring at me. I go, and that's what happened. And we just were like face to face, and he's just staring at me like, I didn't believe a word you said. He goes, take your belt off, sir. And then he just totally searched every inch of me. He goes, all right, you're good now. And then I went in there. And then they brought him in, and they kept saying back, because they had a one-way mirror. And I knew if you press up against that mirror that he can see. So as they brought him in, it was perfect timing. He turned right to the mirror, and I went boom, and I put my face right up against the mirror. And the sheriff went after me. He's like, get back. I told you to get back. And then I pulled back, and he did like a slight lunge, like he was going to move towards the mirror. They had the strap down team. He made like just a slight twinge, and they just grabbed him, boom, threw him down and strapped him in.
So this thing that you've been working toward for 20 plus years happens. Has your life after the execution had any more freedom to it?
Oh, absolutely. And my wife used to see me downstairs, and I would be on the computer looking at similar cases. I'm making phone calls. I'm constantly calling up Bob, God bless him. Like, Bob, this latest DNA, you don't need a full sample. They can load it into CODIS, going on. He goes, I haven't heard about it. And I'd send him articles, and I was just constantly, it didn't take away any pain. I hate that thing, like, it won't bring them back. Well, I assure you, no victim is believes in reincarnation. What it does do is it allows you to close that chapter, the person who did it, and get on with your life and not have to worry about where is he, is justice was not served. It closes that so you can mourn in peace. There's a peacefulness to it.
Finality. It's final.
Yeah. And there's a feeling like we did it. We gave him the ultimate punishment. Rachel would be happy with that. It's what a brother, I felt, a family member should do. If that happens to, God forbid, a family member, there's no middle ground there for what occurred. I went through every inch of that crime scene. I kicked everyone out of the wake, and I went up and down the scratches on Rachel's face. I put my face about an inch away from hers because I wanted it to sear in and I wanted it to burn in, that I would never forget what he did to her. That would drive me at times. I'd say, God, I can't do this anymore. And I'd be like, remember what happened? And I'd keep going. More posters, more phone calls.
So you came out of the basement.
Yeah.
Your wife got her husband back, I guess.
Yeah. That used to really bother her, and I don't blame her. But I wouldn't have changed anything. I still would have engulfed myself in the case, no matter what.
Who were for you? If the case and the trial are the stage, everybody's looking from a different balcony. You're looking from your balcony, prosecutors, defense attorneys, everybody's got a different balcony. From your balcony, who were the hidden heroes in this?
Well, it's funny. I'm going to try and get the names for you. There's a couple of people. One is obviously Morrow, who handled the second half, the district attorney.
Ray Morrow. Yeah.
He did a brilliant job. But definitely Haran, who came out of retirement and just sat there for no money and prosecuted this case. But there's one guy that I don't think has gotten credit, and no one has mentioned.
Okay, drum roll.
He was on the stand, and they're like, "God, he didn't do too well." So when the crime scene guy came in, remember, this DNA was almost non-existent at this point. So there's a guy that came there, and he secured the crime scene. He pushed everyone back, and he saw the DNA, if you will, on Rachel's leg. And he meticulously scraped every bit of it and saved it. And he made sure that the chain of custody was ironclad. And again, this is 1988.
Yep.
We didn't have CODIS. We didn't have DNA sample. It was just coming in.
It was literally just getting started. I think like 1987 in the UK was like the very first even mention of it.
But this guy was on his game. And he said, this might in the future be something. And had he not done that, they could poke little holes. Oh, this 3 people hanging out on a cool fall evening. We don't know what happened, all that other stuff.
But with the DNA, you can't refute it. Yeah.
What was that guy's name?
I can find out for you. I don't know his name, but I will find that out for you. And then the woman from Life Codes, who happened to live around the block from us in Yorktown, she's the one that initially loaded it and put it into the system. And she did a really good job on that. Again, it was early stages of the DNA, but the way she loaded it at Life Codes, which was not a government agency or anything.
Okay, I have to pause right now, but I am so grateful that we got to have this conversation, and I wish I could stay. I have lots of more questions. I really appreciate you bringing Rachael alive here today, and also your just unshakable commitment to seeing this thing done, and it got done. It's very, very healing for me. And Jen, we've talked about
100%. Yes.
Yeah, very healing. And there are other people from GW, our friends, our community who've been listening, who are having that experience. And I can imagine that there are people who have been through similar things. I mean, I really feel like the intensity of what you experienced and how you handle it and how you went to the dark side and walked through it. It's just remarkable, and it's compelling, and I think that it will really make a big difference to a lot of people who are suffering to hear your fortitude and how you got through this. So I really appreciate you.
You got it.
The Williamson County Cultural Arts Commission of Franklin, Tennessee wishes to thank our men and women in blue who help us deliver safe and fun family and community cultural events year-round, including one of the only authentic bluegrass festivals in the country. Bluegrass Along the Harpeth takes place every July and at the Williamson County Fair in August and at the annual Tennessee International Independent Film Festival. Check out our full calendar of events at wccac-tn.org.
Andrea mentioned that this has been quite cathartic for both of us. I wonder from your perspective what you have liked about the Hero Maker podcast and what you have not liked, or where you think we should be doing something more.
No, I think it's great. You're handling it very professionally, and I think there's an opportunity too through your podcast to show how important DNA is, not just to solve, but when you solve, you prevent.
Yeah.
I forget the number, but how many rape kits are sitting on the shelves in each state is, to me, disgusting and mind-boggling. Those are women that were raped, and how many of those that were raped was that guy a Prieto or a minor version of it?
Right.
And he's in for a robbery, and he's going to be out again.
You'll be glad to know we don't have a backlog in Vermont.
You do not. Very good.
We do not. But yeah, I think that's fair. That's something that we could probably amplify the message on.
Yeah, and this familiar DNA, they're getting a lot of pushback from using it. But, for cases that you're involving murder or rape, all hands on deck type of thing. Because, again, you're not just solving, you're preventing. I saw we had the Gilgo murder case on Long Island, and I'm not very fond of some of the people that have worked on that. And one of them went to federal prison, the police chief. But he came out and they said, well, are you going to use familiar DNA? And his assistant or whatever said, oh, we're open to anything. If familiar DNA will help, then we'll do it. And I'm like, what do you mean you're open to it? This is a serial murderer. You should be all over that. Shouldn't be some parent or a newspaper asking you if you're going to use familiar DNA.
Yes.
And then they finally used it. They had a new police commissioner in. They finally used it. And that's how they found out one of the guys was that did it, one of the killings. But I'd love to see that guy. I'll track down his name for you.
Okay.
The crime scene guy.
I made a note. That would be great. We'd love to reach out to him if he's still alive and talk to him about how that case impacted his career and to laud him for how key he was in that. I didn't know if maybe there was one episode that you enjoyed more than others from what we've done.
I always enjoy listening to Bob Murphy because, there's a tape of him getting a guy to confess to murder on a phone call. And Bob's just talking like he normally does. It just depends upon the jury. He goes, the guy's like, well, hypothetically it happened. Bob was, no, let's keep it hypothetical because I don't want you to say anything that'll get you in trouble. And he goes on and on. At the end of the call, the guy's all but confessed to the murder. But, I definitely love talking to Bob, hearing Bob, I should say. It was a group effort. In the end of the day, it's exactly what Bob said. He finally sat me down one day and he said, I'd done a couple bad moves. I brought one guy in that was a nut and I was looking at another way of doing things that didn't make any sense. And I was trying to get blood from doing all this stuff. And Bob's like, Matt, I need to talk to you. Up to this point, you've been heroic. It's admirable. I don't know what to say. But now it's time just to shut the doors, lock everything in. He goes, I'm telling you, his DNA is on the shelf somewhere. When they pull it out and put it in CODIS, we're going to get a hit. We have everything we need. It's just a question of time. 3 years later, Bob picked up the phone and I picked up the phone. I was on vacation and he said, can you sit down? I said, sure. And I sat down and he told me.
What did he say?
He said, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah. And he said, we got him. And I remember saying, Bob, we've been down this road before. He goes, no, we got a cold hit. It's 1 in 2 billion or something like that. He goes, we got him, Matt. And then I was like, where is he? That was my first thought was, where is he? Because I'm thinking he's on the run.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to get home. I'm going to,
go chase him down, right? Get your posse from the Marines together and go get him.
Get my cop friends and we would have been hitting the road. But he said, no, he's not going anywhere. He's on death row. And I'll never forget that day. And I was in such shock. I was on vacation. I got lost for 2 hours and couldn't make it back to the hotel. And I finally got back to the hotel and everyone, my wife and everyone was like, where the hell have you been? I was walking around with the pizza. It was cold by then. And I just gave him, I told him what happened. And
do you have kids?
Yeah, I have one. In that, Rachel would have been so proud. Soccer player, son, cross country. And he's finishing his last year in med school right now. And my daughter works with autistic children. She's getting her doctorate in Fordham right now, working on a PhD in school psychology and working with autistic children.
See, and that's the direction I thought Rachel was going before she had the change of heart and decided to go to law school. And I remember a particular jumper she would wear when she was going to do student teaching. And it was green corduroy with little yellow ducks on it. Yeah. And we were like, because, we were cool college kids still. And we're like, oh, that's kind of teachery. But I remember that dress. It was a jumper because she had to wear a shirt under it.
She works in the legal department of the education department. So I think that's the route she was going to go.
I wondered how this has shaped your parenting in any way. Has it shaped your parenting in any way?
No.
Or maybe you don't know because you can't know because you never had the chance to parent without this happening.
My daughter was years back, had gotten some stuff on the internet from bullying. And I immediately reacted. I had the police over. I contacted an attorney. I had the parents contacted. And then it was from an internet site, I believe in Poland or something like that. So they couldn't get it. So I was having some of my friends that worked in the State Department. I was going to pay them to give me the names. I don't let things go that I think are leading in, that naivety is not there. I'm more watchful of people. I've seen it all. I've seen the people that have taken advantage of when you're in that funk, if you will, when you're not thinking clearly, when you're vulnerable, you're looking for someone to talk to, people take advantage of you there. There's a lot of predators out there. If you deal with 100 people a day, you only have that one person. 99% of the people out there are great. But so I am a little.
Are you overprotective, do you think? More protective of your daughter or both your children than maybe you would have been?
Oh, yeah, definitely. definitely more protective.
What if you told your kids?
They know everything because, during the trial and everything, I had to explain where I was going and what I
Yep.
was doing. They have their own view of me, but, they love me and everything. They call me a stubborn Marine sometimes and all that other stuff. I'm definitely more protective, but more cherishing too. Life can go quickly. When I see my son playing a soccer field, I think, oh, Rachel would have loved to be here, So I'm more reactive as far as I know what's out there in this world. I've seen it overseas. I've seen it in this country, and I've seen it up close with my sister.
Yeah.
I check the databases for the predators in my area, and I have cameras in my house.
Yeah. What advice would you give me and Andrea as we continue to tell the story and try to leave nuggets of wisdom for the justice system?
First of all, a pilot and a Marine giving advice to two people or you is pretty sad because I'm not there. You guys are a lot brighter doing this and you're doing a great job. I would like to see, and you're going that direction, is that this is an example of why we need certain laws, why we need DNA, why we should not have a backload of rape kits. To me, that is just repulsive. We should know who's in this country. Prieto was able to change his name at the drop of a dime and go across the border and come back. He went California, Virginia, changed his name to Gonzalez, went back across the border, back to being Prieto in California. And he had shot 3 people in California, and the bodies were piling up that he hadn't been connected to yet. We need to be able to track people. And if someone's here, especially a non-U.S. citizen, and they commit a violent act, I'm not saying deport or go in that direction. I'm saying, though, if someone is here and they're not a U.S. citizen and they've shot 3 people, you need to have a way to track that person. His DNA and fingerprints should be on file.
Yeah.
As it would be for anyone that has shot 3 people. Bob went face to face with Prieto, and at the time it was Gonzalez.
Yeah, that story is such a jaw dropper. I've told that to a couple of my cop friends, and they're like, what? Imagine him finding that license falling out in the box of stuff and being like, I met this dude. I interviewed him. That's small world stuff right there.
I had a really wild, my best friend, he came down to the execution, my friends, they were on the other side from the protesters. He's my best friend, but I had to call him as soon as Bob told me, but he had changed his cell phone and I didn't know how to contact him and anything. He was like a brother to me. Anyway, his sister was out back gardening and I hadn't talked to Kim, that's her name, for 15 years, 17 years, a long time. So she's gardening out back with her daughter and this butterfly comes around. And it was fact, but this story stuck out and they told it to me again about a funeral just a year ago. So this butterfly is flopping around and she says to her daughter, this is so weird, but do you remember Robbie's friend, Matt? She's like, oh yeah. He goes, his sister was killed. She goes, this butterfly is making me think about Rachel. And then the butterfly actually landed on her and it stayed on her arm for 5 minutes. She goes, I just feel Rachel. She goes, it's the weirdest thing. So then eventually the butterfly flew away. So they go inside and Bill, he's my other friend. He's graduated West Point, and everything. And they tell him this story, how this butterfly, and Bill's like, that's kind of random. You haven't thought about Matt and Rachel. We haven't seen them for 15 years. She goes, I know, but I'm telling you. And daughter was like, Dad, it was really weird. She's talking about Rachel. And then the phone rang.
And it was you calling.
It was me calling to tell her to find Rob because Rachel's murderer had just been found.
That's intense.
I know, they told me. And they said, I'm like, I remember she was like quiet. I'm like, Kim? And Bill's like, who's that? She goes, it's Matt. They found the murderer. And I heard Bill go, what?
Yeah, that is a showstopper right there.
Little things like that pop up.
So have there been any positives that have come from your perspective? Any positives that have come from this?
I'm definitely stronger in certain ways. I grew up fast, after the murder, then I went straight to Desert Storm. That's when I decided to get married and everything. It definitely grew me up. I grew up fast and hard.
Well, and it sounds also like you had to step into your dad's shoes a little bit since he took a sharp decline after the murder.
Yeah, everything, that I don't have a care in the world, going to be a pilot, to the world changed very, very, very rapidly. And it was a dark place. It became a brighter and a stronger place. The only positive I can think of is that justice was served, that it showed not to give up. I'll comment on that on Twitter occasionally to families and stuff like that. I said, whatever you do, do not give up.
Yeah.
You know, and these cold case squads that have popped up are because of cases like Rachael, where the police are now pursuing 30-year-old cases and they're solving them.
Mm-hmm. With new technology.
Yeah, that is a deterrent. And that is, if you do this, we're going to get you eventually. And I believe it also has a positive effect on the families. And just from a moral standpoint, I think, you know, if there's a positive about this, it's one of many cases that have shown when the judicial system doesn't give up, there is something called justice. And when we bring technology in and dedicated people like Bob Murphy and Morrow and Horan as the prosecutors, as the woman who cycled the DNA, just this average mother, her day job is to work in a lab, and she was the linchpin for this whole thing.
Yeah.
You know?
So doing your job and doing it well and attention to detail, no matter what part of the system you're in, pays off.
Yeah. And you look at the teamwork that was involved in this, the amount of people that came together is just really phenomenal, from the attorneys to the cops to the database, the national database with the FBI, to the DNA techniques, to the lab techs, to the witnesses that came forward. It just all came forward to stop something very evil.
Very evil. Your sister's case was a large part of the reason why I became a police officer. I had set out on a path to become a journalist.
There you go.
I'd like to think I've helped a few people along the way, but it was certainly a huge motivator. I could not reconcile how something so massive could happen and there was no info to go on. It was like dead in the water. And I couldn't stand the no answers for you guys, for the family, at the time, it was for my younger players who Kate and I were the mother figures to as captains of the team. And the city went from being a playground, Washington, D.C., to being a very scary place for us.
Yeah.
So, well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you're going to give us a couple names.
Yeah, no problem. There's a couple things. I'll just send them to you in an email or something. You know, I found the guy, Arlington had Tony. They couldn't find him for 10 years. I tracked him down in Queens. He was with Tina Jefferson. They had a picture.
Oh, right.
And it had Queens on it. So they had him as a suspect, anyone information leading. So I tracked him down in Queens and they came up Arlington and Fairfax and interviewed him and cleared him.
Somebody that had been like a boyfriend with Tina Jefferson?
With the sister and had met Tina Jefferson.
Oh, right.
In the end, everything I did, went from being dangerous to dedicated and everything like that, in the end, it really had almost zero impact. And what did it was the police and that little woman in the lab and that crime scene guy that collected the DNA. In the end, that's what zero impact on this case. It was the DNA and the hard work of Bob Murphy and the other ones, making sure they had ironclad, proper custody chain, etc.
Well, score one for the good guys on this one.
That's it.
I've really enjoyed this time talking with you, and I look forward to maybe catching up again.
Great. I'm glad to share it with you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Matt. All the best to you.
You too. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Thanks to sound mixer and podcast producer Michael Doherty, sound designer Andy Bill of Submachine Audio, and graphic designer Jungleen Bay. Thanks also to me, Hero Maker director and producer Andrea Schreeman. Please subscribe to the show where you listen to podcasts and take a moment to rate us. It really helps the podcast grow. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Hero Maker Pod. Want to collaborate or suggest a guest? Please email us at media@theheromakerpodcast.com. The Hero Maker Podcast is a production of Prudent Pictures. Thanks so much for listening.